This is Kelly Scarff, and you're listening to the Engineering Communication Podcast.
Everything before this will be cut out.
I'm not a writer. I think it would be
You
hard
are
to.
a writer.
Very good.
That was fantastic.
That was fun. Did I talk too much? No, that was perfect.
Hi, everyone. Today on the podcast, we're excited to welcome Matt Wiles, Vice President and COO of ECR Engines from NASCAR's Richard Childress Racing. Matt earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech and a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Before joining ECR, he spent more than 10 years at General Motors in a wide range of engineering roles, shaping his deep expertise in complex mechanical and thermal systems, component design, and results-driven testing and manufacturing. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here today.
We are happy to have you. We're going to start fairly broad. I would love for you to talk or take us rather through a day as the Vice President and COO of ECR Engines. What do
Sure.
your days look like?
Sure. Well, that's one of the great things I love about working in racing and specifically at ECR. Every day is different. We can characterize the days or the weeks or the years by, say, our off-season and in-season. Say, in NASCAR racing at the Cup level, we're racing 38 weekends throughout the year, roughly February through November. It's a very long season. It's actually one of the longest seasons in motorsports. So when we get to the off-season, friends and family may say, well, what are you doing? You must be taking a lot of time off, taking a vacation. And in actuality, the off-season is one of the busiest times for us. That's the time of the year where we have all of our engines back in our facility. We're able to upgrade them for additional power and durability for the upcoming seasons. And obviously, even to that point, we have to do a lot of logistical work in terms of working with our partners, the folks that manufacture our components, whether they be on campus or literally around the world to procure these parts. Some of the components in our engines take up to 26 weeks to manufacture. So logistics and planning play a large portion. And again, that off-season is busy from a technical perspective, but also from a business perspective, it's equally as busy as part of my executive duties. Working on contracts and partnerships, not only with the teams that we provide engine leases for, signing those folks back up, but our staff as well, making sure that we take care of contractual obligations, performance reviews, and then planning for the next year budgets. Budgets are very exciting, I'm being sarcastic, but budgets are a necessary part of any business and planning, and that can be an extremely busy time of the year. And now we're here at the end of March. We're well within our racing season, so it's extremely important for us to start our racing season out smoothly. So what does that mean for us? For the engine company, it means going to our race events. We kick out the year with our biggest race event, the Daytona 500. It's our Super Bowl. So making sure that we don't have engine issues, our engines perform optimally, we don't have failures on TV. And because when we get behind and we have issues on track, it makes the start of our season difficult. Yeah. Say, for example, in the racing season, our weeks are cadenced in terms of kind of a typical regular schedule. Mondays are very important. We kick off with reviewing the race events from the weekend. We have driver debriefs. More importantly, we have analytical data that we record in our cup cars and gather statistical information. So we're very data-driven in general at our company, not only with our production activities but development. But first and foremost, if we do have issues at the racetrack, it's very important that we understand exactly what happened. If you've ever seen an engine failure, it's literally a bucket of broken parts. It's our job to understand what was the primary initiation site, what part broke first, why did it break, what brother and sister parts, say in that manufacturing batch, were affected, where are those parts at in other engines, And if we need to, we try to recall those engines all in the guise of not failing again. Failures do happen. We need to understand exactly why and to try to mitigate them from happening again. So that can all happen literally on a Sunday or a Monday. Throughout the week, if we have a smooth week, we have series of meetings with our production staff, with our development staff. We'll talk more about communication, but we are it's some ways impossible to over communicate.
Yeah.
But it's important to also be efficient in our communication. And the weeks are also aligned with preparing for the next race event. Again, the NASCAR season is brutal. We're racing nearly week in and week out. We're testing engines constantly at our facility, both on our engine dynamometer, as well as we have our partners come and test their vehicles on our chassis dynamometer, not only to ensure quality of the vehicle system, but also to characterize the efficiency of the powertrain. Our engines, we know what they make on our engine dynamometers with conditioned air. And then similarly on the chassis dyno, we want to make sure that all that power is being integrated to the track. So things like driveline angle, tire setups can all influence that, lubricants in our transaxles and transmissions. So we're constantly working with our vehicle side partners to make sure that we're ready to go race and be prepared for the race event.
I want to talk a bit about your kind of problem solving and your creativity, because you are a very creative person. Engineers have to be creative in the way that they, approach problems and solve problems. So motorsports engineering often operates under very tight constraints, a lot of which you just kind of talked about, whether that's rules, budget, timelines within these racing seasons. How has working inside those constraints shape the way you think about creativity or how has it developed your creativity in terms of problem solving in engineering?
Sure. What we're talking about, I think, is a team aspect. This industry that I'm in, that I work in, is a very unique one in terms of it's a mix of engineering, manufacturing, and a sport. Mm-hmm. So you're combining all those elements that can be tangible and both untangible. Things like momentum matter a lot. When I spoke about making sure that we start our season off smoothly and not having engine issues, that's what I meant about momentum. But what we do at ECR Engines, we have 109 enthusiastic men and women that work at our company. What all brings us together is our enthusiasm about engines, not necessarily racing engines. We can talk more about that in terms of people's backgrounds. We do have folks that have raced in sports car racing, grassroots dirt track racing, obviously NASCAR racing. We have folks that range a span of education levels from PhD engineers to non-degreed folks that have been in the industry working for decades. And really, ECR is one of the smallest engine companies with the smallest budgets. But what we do to fight above our weight is to work together cohesively. So what I mean by that is, say, for example, if we're developing a new flow path, a porting system for our engines, we'll take those technicians that I referenced that literally can see the airflow, like in the Matrix. We'll pair them with engineers to create an initial port or flow path design. We'll cut that flow path CNC, and we'll go test. And then after we do that initial test, we'll give those components to those technicians and allow them to either add or subtract material in that flow path, test. Once we find an optimized design, we can reverse engineer that, digitize it, CNC cut it 1,000 times over and again. But that's just a small example about how we can work together to really do great things.
Yeah. So that's a really good segue into the next question, because with your leadership background, you've likely dealt with some complex team dynamics over the years. Can you share some of your strategies for effective communication within the engineering teams? Particularly when you're faced with high-stakes projects, but just in general, like how do you deal with complex teams and the communication that has to occur within them.
Sure. Mr. Hendrick has a saying, we're in the people business, not only in his automotive network, but in his racing teams. I don't work directly for Mr. Hendrick, but we actually have a close alliance with their engine shop, so that's the reference that I'm making there. But communication is important. It's extremely important. Managing and identifying with people is important. Very early in my engineering career, as I was working on my professional development, I learned a lot about myself. I'm naturally actually an introvert, so that can be difficult in team settings. So I spent a lot of time studying and going through different courses like Dale Carnegie. That was extremely helpful for me for multiple reasons, to be able to communicate in a business setting, be able to ask certain questions, certain approaches, and in some ways my leadership has gone even further back in that. My parents encouraged me to participate in sports as a child growing up, all kinds of different sports. And scouting as well. So one of my cross-country coaches talked about envisioning results, which I think is important. Envisioning yourself finishing the race. And as we go through a career or go through certain projects, that's important. You don't necessarily have to have all the answers at every step of the way, but having a vision and working in a team environment to be inspirational, both as a team leader as well as a team member, is important.
So a lot of students here at Tech, but also engineering students, I'm sure, everywhere, they're trying to figure out what they should focus on outside of class to become better engineers. Based on the people you've hired and the people you've mentored, what experiences or habits outside of the classroom seem to make the biggest difference once someone is in industry? Sure.
First, even the performance and habits in the classroom are very important. We do look for that in terms of QCA, so I don't want to underestimate the importance of that. But outside of the classroom, what we look for in potential employees is demonstrated interest and passion. One of those things, those demonstrated interests, people can work on. Say, for example, these great student projects, which I've already been exposed to today and later today, are a core example of that. Myself, I participated in the Formula SAE project at school. Those are great examples of projects where potentially, depending on your background, you can gain experience with, and we look for as employers. Not everyone in racing comes from a family that are racers. I don't come from a family that were necessarily racers, more automotive enthusiasts. But having these demonstrated passions or interests are very important to us. We can teach a lot of things. Schools can teach a lot of things. But having that passion is something that can't be taught or instilled. So we do look for that as well in our potential recruits.
Yeah, that's passion and curiosity are always that. Like I always say, if you're curious, you'll get to where you need to get to, because that curiosity is going to propel you forward. Speaking of that, this isn't a question that I had on the list, but what's like the coolest car you've driven or worked on in your career?
Well, I get that question quite often. I've been very fortunate in my career, and like I maybe alluded to, my path hasn't been linear. There's a quote that Roger Penske says that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. Yeah. So again, I didn't necessarily plan this path out, but I've been so fortunate to work on so many top-level motorsports engine projects, from racing at the Indy 500 multiple times to racing at the 24-hour Le Mans, 24-hour Daytona, NASCAR racing. But I get asked the question, have you ever driven your projects or the racing cars? The answer, sadly, is no, because there's so much time and effort that goes into producing those vehicles that there's a tremendous amount of resources that shouldn't be lost in case you crash damage them. But like I said, I'm just so blessed and fortunate to be able to work on so many different projects.
Yeah. Is the Daytona 500 track, is that the one where you sit down and you can't see the end of the other side?
Well, depending on your vantage point.
Okay.
High up in the stands, I think you can see the entire track. Lower in the stands, you can't. But yeah, that's a great event. Every racing track's a little bit unique, and I have appreciation for every one of them.
I took my nephew and my sister and brother-in-law to the Bristol Raceway last year to see an event, and that was the first. My dad's a huge NASCAR. I mean, I grew up watching my dad watch NASCAR, and I took my family to the Bristol track, and I had never been to one live. Incredibly loud. I was shocked that there were people there without ear protection on, like hearing protection. But it was such a fun event, especially for someone that isn't. I'm interested in NASCAR insofar as my family is interested in NASCAR. But I find live sports like that to be much more fun than watching them on TV. So it was such an interesting event. I feel like everyone should see a race like that at some point in their lives.
That's great. What you've described is actually part of what developed my passion for wanting to do what I did, going to these race events. My home track is in Martinsville, Virginia. But when you go to these racing events, you get a visceral sense that you don't you can't have on television. Television is actually the best seat in the house in terms of watching the race event, but the smells, the sounds, the other
atmosphere,
aspects,
the energy.
That's very important to our fans, and we are in an entertainment industry. Make no mistake. Like I said, it's a mix, a very weird mix of industries, but we are there to entertain. But part of the reason why I'm here today, and I want to extend the invitation to all the listeners on this podcast, is to come visit not only ECR or Richard Childress Racing, our campus, visit any other of the engine or NASCAR teams, because really, as a mechanical enthusiast, I think the story is really what goes on at our shops. People don't appreciate the amount of effort and manufacturing and planning that goes into producing the show that happens on Saturdays and Sundays. And that's a whole nother level of interest potentially for people to be engaged with. Yeah. We see this in other kind of series, F1, Drive to Survive. NASCAR have been working on things like that, but again, as an engineer, I definitely appreciate all that goes into producing the shows that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have kind of two final questions. One isn't on the list, but I always like to ask this to our guests. What is something that a mechanical engineering student or an engineering student in any field of engineering who is interested in getting into a field like yours, what's one thing they could do here while they're in school that they might not think about doing that would help them?
Like I mentioned before, having that vision is probably the starting step, envisioning your end goal. And I want to encourage everyone, students especially, to dream big, because in this life, this long life that I hope that we all have, you're going to accomplish a lot, and you may accomplish it a lot sooner. So dreaming big is important. The journey is often more satisfying than actually achieving the goal. So having many goals is important. Just exposing yourself to a lot when you can, taking advantage of a great academic institute like Virginia Tech and all that there is to offer here. Taking different classes. I took some mining engineering classes, and I look back as I prepared to come here this week. That was a really enjoyable class. Exposing yourself to something that you may have a cursory interest may change your career path and your dreams as well. So it's really important to experiment and go outside of maybe your comfort zone or areas that others have encouraged you to pursue. Listen to your own internal barometer.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the stuff that informs my work now came from experiences that have nothing to do with my work now. Like a vacation I took, some weird thing I was offered and said yes to, and I didn't. I thought, oh, this will be fun to do now, and now it's coming back, and I'm like, oh, I can apply what I learned there to what I'm doing now.
This is literally what they mean by the spice of life, I think. Again, I hope that we all have long lives and long careers, and doing different things is definitely part of that, and being inspired is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I have this last question down. However, I feel like I'll ask it, but I have another last question for you. What advice would you give your college self that would have saved you a lot of stress that maybe college students may learn from?
Well, stress and adrenaline can be a good thing.
Yeah.
They're good motivators, so let's not try to reduce that too much. I'm not sure I would change too much on my career path, but I can try to give some good advice that I tried to learn along the way. We've already talked about visualizing goals, extremely important, visualizing yourself in certain scenarios and trying to achieve those. I've also mentioned being prepared when opportunities arise. Honestly, some of the best things that have happened to me professionally have just literally been being prepared for when they happened. Yeah. So being able to ride that wave when it surges is important. And like I mentioned, just dreaming big and enjoying the journey is really crucial rather than just achieving the goal itself.
Yeah. Okay, final question, Matt. And I'm asking this because we were talking about travel before we started here. What's your favorite vacation you've been on thus far? Or favorite, maybe not vacation, but favorite trip?
Sure. I kind of gave you a generic answer that it's always the next one. So my wife and I, Cassandra, we're going on a cruise to the Caribbean here next week. But, I've been lucky enough to live and work abroad. I lived in the UK for 2 years. That was a great stepping stone to many destinations in Europe. And
where in the UK?
Northamptonshire.
Okay.
So that's in the Motorsports Valley, about an hour north of London. But again, being positioned in that continent, you could travel very economically. I've enjoyed Istanbul. I've been there 4 times. But like I said, I think it's always the next adventure is kind of the exciting one. Just exploring new places is very important to enrich yourself.
Yeah.
And traveling is the only expense that truly makes you richer. Yeah.
Sage advice. I also think that you can go anywhere and have fun. Well, maybe not anywhere, but it depends on who you're going with that makes the trip worthwhile as well. Like I can go to somewhere where I would be bored out of my mind if it was just me. But if I had the right people around me, it'd be great.
Sure. And then every trip, we can have different types of trips as well, like educational trips or fun trips or physical trips. So yes, to your point, every trip and travel partner is a very unique experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, Matt. And to all the listeners and viewers out there, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time for another episode of the Engineering Communication Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Of course. The Engineering Communication Podcast is sponsored by Virginia Tech's Mechanical Engineering Department, where Kelly Scarff is a faculty member and directs the Technical Communication Program. We would like to thank Virginia Tech's Mechanical Engineering Department and the Technology Enhanced Learning and Online Strategies Division for making this podcast possible.